Residential Site Valuation and Cost Approach, page 28 and 29. Be obtained from a number of sources, including personal inspection, public records, and general knowledge of market conditions and future plans for the area. Governmental factors. Governmental factors are also important considerations when examining the value of a site. The most important governmental factor is zoning. Most land would be worth more if used for commercial purposes instead of for residential homes. But the government limits the way a piece of property may be used. Governmental restrictions on land use also include public easements for roads or sewers and building codes that restrict building size or placement. All of these factors can limit the buildable area of a site. Remember that some non-governmental restrictions can also impact value in the same way, namely deed restrictions and private easements. Other governmental factors that affect site value are taxes and public services. A heavy tax burden can lower the value of a site, whereas tax abatements can make a site more attractive. Public services that are close by, such as police and fire, can make a site more desirable than one where services are perceived as being too far away to provide adequate service and protection. All of this data can be obtained from public records. Social factors. Social factors may be a consideration when determining site value because of trends in the marketplace. Although they are not as direct a factor as physical and governmental factors, the social dynamics and demographic trends in an area are still important. They can help determine what type of development might be best suited for the market. They are also useful in identifying area growth patterns, in indicating which direction the area is growing. All of this data should be in the appraiser's general data files. Extra note: over 55 neighborhoods. Highest and best use. After analyzing all aspects of the site, the appraiser is ready to determine the property's highest and best use. Highest and best use is the most profitable, legally permitted, economically feasible, and physically possible use of a parcel of land. Even if there are buildings or other improvements on the land, the appraiser still considers the site as if it were vacant and available for any use. This value is then compared with the value of the site as it is currently improved. The higher value determines what is the highest and best use for the land. This is one of the most important factors an appraiser considers before forming an opinion of value. The site may be more valuable if the buildings are torn down and the property put to a different use. The property owner would want to know these factors. Determining highest and best use. Determining the highest and best use for the subject property is an important exercise. The goal is to determine whether or not the property is being used for its most profitable permitted use. Highest and best use is always considered, although sometimes it is more important than others. Of course, with homes in the middle of a residential neighborhood, this is not an issue because the property is not likely to have a radical zoning change. But with commercial land or vacant land in an area that is changing, growing, or expanding, this can be a significant point that needs to be addressed. Page 29. The appraiser must be aware of all governmental restrictions on a piece of land. Plus, the appraiser must also know the characteristics of that parcel of land. If the ground is too soft to support a large building, for example, this must be noted by the appraiser in determining the highest and best use for the site. Also, it is possible that a parcel of land would be more valuable if the current structure were torn down and replaced with a new type of building. For instance, an old house were torn down and replaced with a new type of building. For instance, an old house on land that is now zoned commercial. This type of situation should be noted in an appraisal report, along with all costs of demolition subtracted out from the final opinion of value. Process for determining highest and best use. When determining highest and best use for a property, the appraiser gathers various values, then compares these values. The steps can be summarized as follows. Estimate the value as if the land were vacant and available for any use. Estimate the value as the property is currently improved. Make a final determination of highest and best use by comparing the values arrived at in the first two steps. Although in the end only two value estimates are compared, the process is really much more involved. These steps involve performing market studies, marketability studies, and other analysis depending on the potential uses considered. Remember too that all relevant costs must be considered as part of each value estimate. This may include repairing or tearing down the present structure. One problem is that there are often numerous possibilities for developing vacant property, and the appraiser must at least consider all those that are possible. These possibilities should not be limited by the biases of the appraiser, but should instead be based on the property and the market. The ultimate decision on highest and best use is reached by applying four tests. Four tests for highest and best use. When evaluating ideal use, appraisers look at four tests for highest and best use. 1. Is the ideal use legally permitted on the property? Here the appraiser is primarily looking at governmental restrictions as well as deed or other restrictions. Is the ideal use permitted with the existing zoning that is on the property? What is the chance of a zoning change? A zoning change must be shown to be reasonable or probable, not speculative. 2. Is it physically possible for the ideal structure to be built on the property? Here the appraiser is looking at the physical limitations of the site. Is the lot big enough to allow for the proposed structure with the required setbacks, etc.? Does the topography of the site allow the ideal proposed structure? Will the ground support the weight of a large building? 3. Is the ideal use economically feasible on the property? Note, this is sometimes referred to as financially feasible. Here the appraiser is looking to see if there is a market for the use being contemplated. Can the market support another use of this type in its supply and demand model? Are the other value principles conducive to this use?